A political economy, simply put, is the political impacts of an economic decision and the economic consequences of a political decision or an economic impact on politics, right? So it's this kind of complex web that at some point in time, politics and economics got hived off into separate disciplines. And I also encourage my students to be very indisciplined. We have to be transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary. We have to be able to see the links if we're going to make appropriate connections. So political economy of natural resources revolves around land use decision-making or resource use decision-making. I found myself in a very funny position in the early 2000s. I was working in the Okavango Research Institute in Maun at the foot of the Okavango Delta in Botswana. And one of my colleagues there was the president of the Ngamiland Community-Based Natural Resource Management Forum. And this CBNRM is a program, the well-established program around the world that tries to find co-benefits out of protected areas like parks and wildlife in many cases, and communities living around the boundaries of these parks, right? So it's like, well, how do local people derive benefits from the presence of a national park? And so CBNRM was quite a big program in Botswana at the time. And my friend Takadu was the president. So he drafted me in to I got elected first as the vice president of this forum. And the forum represented 143 different community groups in the Okavango Delta, and were being encouraged to create a trust whereby they could enjoy direct benefits from the fruits of tourist revenues, for example. And somehow Takadu went off and did a PhD at the University of Florida, and then I found myself as the president of the Ngamiland CBNRM Forum. I found this very funny, And I said, why me? And the local people said, well, look, you're a white guy, you're well-educated, you know how to speak to government, you can find us money, They had no problem with putting me forward like that. But I found myself to be in an odd position to try to represent the disempowered, right? Because the political economy of natural resources often involves land use decisions that affect very differently empowered groups of people, right? So you've got the local people in Ngamiland who are dependent on access to the resource for fish, for wood fuel, for reeds, like very much a local livelihood dependent way to live. But then there's government and big tourism companies and all other kinds of really powerful actors who often don't even live in this area. And they're making decisions around this, right? And so there's a lot of conflict that emerges within the context of a land use decision. I mean, you've seen many of these things. We see them every day, actually, in every city, in every town, when there's a change to a zoning law. That's a kind of a political economy of the land, right, that's there. In truth, this is what really led me to the conflict resolution trainings, because on one hand, government would hire me as part of a consortium to advise them on a proposed land use, right? So for example, it could be a proposed change to a park boundary, or, the involvement of local people in CBNRM, for example, community-based natural resource management. And then we would give them advice, and then they would do the opposite, right? And then that would lead to conflict, and then they would hire me back to resolve the conflict, and I always found this ironic. I was like, did you not listen to me the first time? Had you listened to me the first time, or listened to us the first time, you wouldn't have had to hire us back to try to resolve your conflict. So that's what the political economy is. And across much of the global south, it's a big struggle around, let's just take Brazil, right? So it's the Bolsonaro-led government, right? He's just been recently removed from office and replaced by Lula da Silva. But that Bolsonaro-led government was promoting the destruction of the Amazon and the promotion of extensive soya plantations where 95% of that soya goes to China and the other 5 is used as a biofuel, but there's so many different problems related to that. You have the marginalization of indigenous people that were smallholder farmers, but also needed access to the forest. You have the destruction of the forest, which is the lungs of the planet in a way, but you promote the large-scale plantation owners who gained great wealth from this activity. And, so you can see it's an extremely complicated web that, you enter into that context with some trepidation, right? But you can't not get involved, right? And I come back to my students, is that you can't shirk your responsibility as an activist for those who are less empowered, who can't speak for themselves. The environment can't speak for itself. It's mute. And people dependent upon that environment for their livelihoods can't speak because no one even sees them or listens to them, right? So you owe it to yourself to be that advocate and to wade in, because if you don't wade in, you leave the broad landscape of decision-making to people who are going to just serve their own narrow interest, often to the detriment of people, planet, and place.